At sea level on Earth, water boils at precisely 100 degrees Celsius. But atmospheric pressure dictates thermodynamics. If you ascend to an altitude of 63,000 feet, you cross a dangerous threshold known as the Armstrong limit. Here, the atmospheric pressure drops so drastically that the boiling point of water perfectly matches the internal temperature of the human body. Without the immediate protection of a pressurized environment, the saliva on your tongue, the fluid coating your eyes, and the moisture lining your lungs will spontaneously boil. This is not a hypothetical scenario from a science fiction novel. It is a strict, inescapable mechanical law of the universe. And yet, the grandest ambition of our modern era, the defining endeavor of the 21st century, is almost entirely built upon a collective, willful ignorance of biological and physical laws exactly like this one. We are currently being sold a profound, beautifully rendered illusion. Private space corporations and technology billionaires project slick, high-definition animations of vast glass domes, sprawling subterranean cities, and smiling colonists stepping onto red dirt in sleek, tailored spacesuits. They frame the monumental journey to the fourth planet from the Sun as the natural, inevitable next step in human evolution. They pitch it to the public as the ultimate insurance policy for our species, a backup drive for humanity. But the architects of these pristine dreams are treating the cosmos like a mere software problem. They speak of interplanetary logistics and planetary colonization as if they are simply waiting for a patch update to human biology, as if our physiological framework is infinitely adaptable. We are, in stark reality, fragile biological machines, forged over 3.8 billion years within an agonizingly narrow envelope of parameters. We require one specific gravitational constant, one highly active magnetic shield, one exact atmospheric composition. When you step outside of that meticulously calibrated cradle, you do not suddenly become an interstellar pioneer. You become a rapidly decaying organic mass. The surface of that neighboring world is not merely a barren desert waiting to be conquered by human ingenuity. It is an active, hyperlethal environment that fundamentally opposes the molecular structure of terrestrial life. The true cost of this endeavor is not measured in billions of dollars or in metric tons of rocket propellant. It will be measured in the agonizing, irreversible degradation of the human skeleton and the systematic shredding of our very genetic code. The reality of what actually awaits us in the dust is a story written in invisible radiation, toxic chemistry, and unforgiving orbital mechanics. It is a silent, lingering death sentence, elegantly disguised as a grand salvation. If you seek the truth in the dark, if you are ready to dismantle the romanticized illusions of our future and confront the uncompromising physics of the cosmos, subscribe and join us on this journey, because the descent into the terrifying reality of the Martian surface begins not with the fiery launch of a rocket, but with a fatal misunderstanding of what a dead planet actually is. To understand why we are so fundamentally wrong about our future in the cosmos, we must first dissect the flaw in our own intuition. Human beings are, by our very nature, terrestrial conquerors. Our entire psychological framework for survival and expansion is deeply rooted in the history of earthly exploration. We crossed churning, storm-ravaged oceans in fragile wooden ships. We pushed through blinding blizzards to plant flags at the South Pole. We engineered pressurized metal tubes to descend into the crushing darkness of the Mariana Trench. Because of this relentless history of triumph over our own world, we have developed a dangerous cognitive bias. We have convinced ourselves that the universe is simply an extension of terrestrial geography. We view the vacuum of space as just another ocean to cross, and we view neighboring planets as just harsher versions of Antarctica or the Sahara Desert. This is the grand illusion of the frontier. We believe that human survival is merely a matter of logistics, a question of building a thicker wall, weaving a warmer coat, or engineering a better oxygen tank. But this intuition is catastrophically flawed. Surviving the absolute worst extremes of Earth is a trivial accomplishment compared to surviving for a single day on the surface of another world. And the reason for this lies in a profound misunderstanding of what a planet actually is. When you stand in the freezing, oxygen-deprived death zone near the summit of Mount Everest, you might feel as though you are at the absolute limit of biological endurance. But even there, gasping for breath in the freezing wind, you are still being cradled by the invisible, monumental machinery of Earth. You are still bathed in a protective magnetic field. You are still held down by a dense, life-sustaining gravitational pull. You are still breathing a remnant of a biosphere constructed by billions of years of photosynthetic life. You are not surviving the universe. You are merely surviving a slightly uncomfortable corner of your own home. To comprehend the terror of leaving this home, we must look back at how we first began to dream of leaving it. For centuries, our perception of Mars was driven entirely by romantic projection rather than physical reality. In the late summer of 18, in the blurry, atmospheric distortion of his lens, he believed he saw long, straight lines crisscrossing the dusty surface. He called them canali, an Italian word meaning channels or grooves. But language is a fragile thing. When his reports were translated into English, canali became canals. That single mistranslation changed the course of human imagination for a century. A canal implies construction. It implies intent. It implies an engineer. Across the Atlantic, a wealthy American astronomer named Percival Lowell became obsessed with this idea. In the late 1890s, Lowell built his own state-of-the-art observatory in the clear, dark skies of Arizona, dedicated almost entirely to mapping these Martian canals. He published books and delivered packed lectures, painting a tragic, beautiful picture for the public. He hypothesized that Mars was an ancient, dying world, a planet whose oceans were drying up, forcing a desperate, highly advanced civilization to build a global network of irrigation trenches, to carry water from the melting polar ice caps to the parched equator. We looked into the dark and we saw a mirror. We saw a civilization fighting for survival against a changing climate. We saw ourselves. This romantic, tragic vision of Mars seeped deeply into our cultural consciousness. It birthed the golden age of science fiction, inspiring tales of Martian princesses and warring planetary empires. We fell in love with the idea of a sister world that was just a little older, just a little drier, and just waiting for us to arrive. But the universe does not care about our romantic narratives. The universe operates on cold, unyielding thermodynamic mechanics, and our intuition failed us because we were judging a planet solely by its surface, completely blind to the terrifying physics operating beneath the crust and out in the void. A planet's ability to host life is not determined merely by its distance from the sun or the presence of frozen water in its dirt. The true habitability of a world is dictated by its internal organs. It is dictated by its heart. Right now, roughly 1,800 miles beneath the floor you are standing on, a planetary scale engine is roaring in the dark. The core of the Earth is a churning, violent ocean of superheated, electrically conductive, liquid iron and nickel. This subterranean ocean is as hot as the surface of the sun, and it is in constant, chaotic motion, driven by the intense heat of radioactive decay and the rotational spin of the planet itself. This twisting, boiling mass of heavy metals generates a phenomenon known as a geodynamo. As the liquid iron flows, it generates colossal electrical currents, and as basic physics dictates, moving electrical currents generate magnetic fields. This subterranean dynamo produces a massive invisible electromagnetic grid that bursts out from the poles of our planet and arches thousands of miles into the vacuum of space, creating an immense teardrop-shaped bubble around the Earth. We call it the magnetosphere. You cannot see it, you cannot feel it, but without it, everything you have ever known would be instantly eradicated. To understand why the magnetosphere is the most important structure in our world, you must understand the true nature of our star. We tend to think of the sun as a passive, warming beacon of light. But the sun is an ongoing, continuous, nuclear explosion. It is a violent, chaotic reactor that is constantly boiling over, throwing billions of tons of matter into space. The sun does not just radiate light. It violently exhales a continuous, hyperlethal storm known as the solar wind. This is a relentless barrage of highly energetic, charged particles, mostly protons and electrons, traveling at over 1 million miles per hour through the vacuum. If a planet does not have a magnetic shield, this high-velocity storm of subatomic shrapnel crashes directly into its atmosphere. Over millions of years, the solar wind strips away the lighter atmospheric gases, carrying the oxygen, the nitrogen, and the water vapor off into the dark, cold void. Without a heavy atmosphere, the planetary pressure drops so low that liquid water violently boils away into vapor, only to be stripped away in turn. This is the silent, invisible war that dictates the fate of planets. The solar wind is the executioner, and the magnetic field is the only armor that matters. Our intuition tells us that a planet is just a ball of rock in space. Our intuition is wrong. A habitable planet is an active fighting entity, engaged in a multi-billion-year struggle to hold onto its air. Earth is a fortress. Its molten core provides the shield, and its massive gravity provides the anchor. When the solar wind hits our planet, it smashes into the magnetosphere at millions of miles per hour, creating a violent, invisible shockwave known as the bow shock. The lethal particles are deflected around us, sliding off the magnetic field lines like water off a ship's hull. The only visible evidence of this relentless, apocalyptic battle is the haunting, silent glow of the auroras at the poles, the visual manifestation of our planetary armor absorbing a lethal blow. This is the reality of what it takes to keep a human being alive. It requires a planet with a living, churning, liquid metal heart. And this is where our intuition completely shatters when we look toward the fourth planet from the sun. For decades, the public believed the Lowellian dream of a dry but habitable world. We plotted trajectories, we calculated orbital mechanics, and we dreamed of colonization, assuming the red planet was simply a sleeping Earth. But in July of 1965, humanity sent its first robotic emissary to pull back the curtain. A small, spindly spacecraft named Mariner 4 performed a daring flyby of Mars, armed with an early television camera. As it sailed past the red world, it transmitted 21 grainy, black and white photographs back to Earth. The transmission rate was agonizingly slow. It took hours for the computers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory to render the data into images. Scientists crowded around the monitors, waiting for the visual confirmation of an atmosphere, of clouds, perhaps even the faint outlines of Lowell's ancient canals. Instead, the images that slowly assembled on the screen shattered the human spirit. The photographs did not show a dying civilization. They did not show a dormant biosphere. They showed a landscape that looked exactly like the desolate, impact-scarred surface of our own moon. There were no oceans, there were no clouds. There were only ancient, undisturbed craters staring back from a barren void. Mariner 4's sensors confirmed the nightmare. The atmospheric pressure was virtually non-existent, less than 1% of Earth's. The surface was exposed directly to the harsh vacuum of space, and most terrifying of all, the instruments detected no global magnetic field. The planet was completely defenseless. The truth was finally revealed. Mars was not a sleeping sister. It was a corpse. Billions of years ago, Mars likely had rivers, lakes, and a thick atmosphere. It likely had a hot, churning, metallic core, just like ours. It generated its own protective magnetic shield. But Mars is significantly smaller than Earth. Because it is smaller, its internal fires burned out faster, its core cooled. The liquid metal turned to solid rock. The geodynamo ground to a halt, and the great invisible shield flickered and died. Once the magnetic field collapsed, the planet was left naked before the fury of the sun. The relentless barrage of the solar wind slammed into the Martian sky. Over millions of years, the atmosphere was violently blasted away into deep space. The rivers boiled, the oceans evaporated, and were carried off by the solar storm. The surface was sterilized by ultraviolet light. The fundamental flaw in the modern dream of Martian colonization is the belief that we can simply build a habitat to compensate for a dead world. We look at artist renderings of beautiful glass domes and underground bunkers, and we nod in approval, thinking it looks like a logical engineering challenge. We think we can build a house on a dead world because we have built houses in the Arctic. But an architect cannot build a molten iron core. A structural engineer cannot reignite a planetary dynamo. A billionaire cannot purchase a deflector shield against a billion-year-old cosmic executioner. We are attempting to transpose our earthly intuition onto an environment that fundamentally rejects our molecular structure. We are looking at a planetary graveyard and telling ourselves that we just need thicker glass. But the lack of a magnetic field and the absence of atmospheric pressure are only the first layers of this cosmic deception. The deeper we peer into the actual physics of the Martian surface, the more we realize that the universe has engineered a trap, an environment so comprehensively toxic to human biology that the very dirt beneath our boots will become our executioner. When the engineers at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration constructed the Phoenix Mars lander, they designed it to perform a very specific kind of planetary autopsy. In the late spring of the year 2008, this robotic scout descended through the thin, freezing atmosphere of the Martian northern hemisphere. It touched down in a vast, desolate plain known as Vastitas Borealis, a region chosen because orbital satellites had detected vast quantities of frozen water buried just beneath the surface. The mission objective was straightforward, yet profound. The lander was to extend a robotic arm, dig a shallow trench into the alien dirt, scoop up a sample of the soil, and deposit it into an onboard laboratory known as the Thermal and Evolved Gas Analyzer. The scientific community was collectively holding its breath. For decades, the prevailing assumption was that Martian soil, while dead and irradiated, was largely inert. We believed it was essentially just oxidized iron and crushed volcanic basalt, a sterile, harmless dirt that, with enough water and organic fertilizer, could theoretically be farmed by future colonists. We projected our earthly agricultural intuition onto a world that we did not truly understand. When the robotic arm delivered the reddish dirt into the miniature ovens of the analyzer, the soil was slowly baked, and the resulting chemical vapors were measured by a mass spectrometer. The data transmission that bounced back across tens of millions of miles of empty space did not reveal a dormant, fertile frontier. It revealed a chemical nightmare. The instruments detected massive concentrations of a highly reactive, heavily oxidized compound known as perchlorate. At first, the mission scientists were in a state of absolute disbelief. The signature was so overwhelmingly strong that they initially suspected the spacecraft itself had been contaminated with solid rocket fuel before it even left Earth. But subsequent tests, and later confirmation by the Curiosity rover on the entirely opposite side of the planet, proved that this was no anomaly. The toxicity was global. To understand the terror of this discovery, you must understand the atomic mechanics of a perchlorate molecule. It is constructed of one chlorine atom rigidly bound to 4 oxygen atoms. This specific configuration makes it an aggressive chemical oxidizer, a compound desperately seeking to strip electrons from other molecules. On Earth, we do not farm we use them to manufacture industrial bleach, heavy-duty dry-cleaning fluids, fireworks, and the solid propellant that launches intercontinental ballistic missiles. And on Mars, this caustic chemical weapon makes up roughly 0.5 to 1% of the global topsoil. That percentage might sound mathematically insignificant to a lay person, but in the realm of biological toxicology, it is a catastrophic dose. The Martian surface is not simply a dusty desert. It is an ocean of fine, powdered, industrial-grade toxin. The grand, romanticized animations of future Martian colonies often depict brave astronauts returning from a long day of exploring, casually shedding their dust-covered spacesuits in an airlock before walking into a brightly lit cafeteria. But the physical reality of interacting with this dust is far more insidious. Mars dust is not like the sand on a terrestrial beach. Earthly sand has been tumbled by ocean currents, ground down by ancient glaciers, and smoothed by billions of years of relentless wind and rain. The particles are rounded. They are biologically relatively benign. Martian dust has never known the soothing touch of a flowing ocean. It has been violently forged by billions of years of meteorite impacts and microscopic thermal fracturing. Under a microscope, a grain of Martian dust does not look like a pebble. It looks like a jagged, asymmetrical shard of shattered glass. Furthermore, because the planet is incredibly dry and constantly bombarded by solar radiation, this dust is highly electrostatically charged. It behaves exactly like the static cling on a television screen, multiplied by an incomprehensible factor. When an astronaut walks across the Martian surface, the friction of their boots against the regolith generates a triboelectric charge. The toxic, microscopic glass shards will physically leap off the ground and magnetically adhere to the synthetic fabric of the spacesuit. It will coat the joints. It will pack into the environmental seals. It will cover the visors in a fine, inescapable red film. When that astronaut steps into the airlock and the chamber repoliticizes, the mechanical vibration and the sudden rush of air will dislodge this toxic dust. It will become instantly suspended in the artificial atmosphere of the habitat, and then the human crew will inhale it. The moment these microscopic shards bypass the protective cilia in the human throat and enter the warm, wet environment of the pulmonary system, a terrifying biological cascade begins. Because perchlorates are highly water-soluble, the toxic compounds will immediately dissolve into the moisture of the human lung, entering the bloodstream almost instantly. Once in the blood, perchlorate targets a very specific, highly vulnerable piece of human machinery, the thyroid gland. Situated in the front of your neck, your thyroid is the master control valve for your body's entire metabolic engine. It utilizes iodine from your diet to synthesize the hormones that regulate your heart rate, your body temperature, and your cellular energy production. But the thyroid cannot chemically distinguish between iodine and a perchlorate molecule. Given the chance, the gland will greedily absorb the toxic Martian chemical, effectively blocking its iodine receptors. The result is a violent, rapid onset of severe hypothyroidism. The human metabolic engine simply shuts down. An astronaut heavily exposed to Martian dust would not experience a dramatic, cinematic death. They would experience a slow, degrading chemical strangulation. Their core body temperature would plummet. Their heart rate would drop to dangerously slow rhythms. They would suffer from severe cognitive fog, profound lethargy, and the systemic breakdown of their muscle tissue. And while the perchlorates shut down the metabolic engine from the inside, the physical, jagged structure of the dust itself begins a second war within the lungs. The human immune system is a highly aggressive defense network. When it detects foreign particulate matter deep within the alveolar sacs, it deploys specialized white blood cells known as macrophages. These microscopic defenders act like cellular garbage disposals, attempting to physically engulf and dissolve the invading particles. But you cannot digest shattered glass. When a macrophage attempts to consume a jagged grain of Martian dust, the sharp edges physically pierce the cell from the inside out. The defender dies, rupturing and releasing a flood of inflammatory enzymes into the delicate lung tissue. The body responds by deploying more macrophages, which also die in the attempt. This creates a continuous, runaway cycle of microscopic cellular death and severe inflammation. Over time, the lungs attempt to heal this constant damage by generating thick, inflexible scar tissue, a condition known as pulmonary fibrosis. The colonists will slowly suffocate, their lungs turning to rigid stone from the inside out, while their poisoned metabolic engines grind to a cold, agonizing halt. Yet, this comprehensive chemical and biological assault is merely what happens if you touch the ground. The true, absolute terror of the Martian environment comes from what is happening in the empty sky directly above it. We have already established that the death of the planetary core stripped away the protective magnetic field, allowing the solar wind to continuously blast the atmosphere into the void. But the sun is not the only monster in the dark. It is, in fact, the lesser of two distinct radiological threats. Beyond the heliosphere of our local star, the vast, silent expanse of the Milky Way galaxy is entirely saturated with a phenomenon known as galactic cosmic rays. The name itself is profoundly deceptive. It sounds like a stream of ethereal light. It is not. Galactic cosmic rays are physical, highly massive atomic bullets. They are the shattered remnants of heavy elements, atoms of carbon, oxygen, and iron, that have been completely stripped of their surrounding electrons. These naked, heavy nuclei are forged in the violent agony of dying stars and expelled across the cosmos by the apocalyptic shockwaves of supernova explosions. They travel through the vacuum of interstellar space for millions of years, accelerating to speeds that approach 99% the speed of light. Because Earth possesses an incredibly dense atmosphere, effectively the shielding equivalent of a wall of liquid water 33 feet thick, these heavy atomic bullets almost never reach the surface where we live. They smash into the upper layers of the stratosphere and harmlessly dissipate their catastrophic energy miles above our heads. Mars has no such armor. The atmospheric density is so pathetically thin that it provides zero meaningful resistance. For a human standing on the red dirt, the sky is effectively an open window to the most violent forces in the universe. When a galactic cosmic ray, an iron nucleus traveling at a fraction of light speed, intersects with human biology, the damage is not merely chemical, it is structural on a quantum level. Imagine the human genome as a vast, meticulously organized library containing miles of perfectly coiled instruction manuals that dictate the operation of every single cell in your body. When one of these relativistic heavy ions strikes a human being, it passes cleanly through the synthetic fabric of the spacesuit, effortlessly penetrates the skull, and tears directly through the soft tissue of the brain and the vital organs. As it violently forces its way through the human body, it creates something called an ionization track. It is a microscopic, highly localized tunnel of absolute atomic destruction. The heavy ion physically smashes the molecules in its path, forcefully tearing electrons away from their host atoms. When this ionization track passes through the nucleus of a human cell, it physically obliterates the local strands of DNA. It does not just cause a simple, easily repairable mutation. It causes a catastrophic double-strand break. The microscopic instruction manual is literally shredded by an atomic sniper bullet. The human body possesses miraculous, deeply ingrained biological repair mechanisms capable of fixing minor genetic damage caused by earthly background radiation. But we have absolutely no evolutionary defense against the localized, total annihilation caused by heavy cosmic ions. The cellular repair enzymes rush to the site of the double-strand break, but the genetic code is so violently fragmented that the cell cannot be rebuilt. The damaged cell is faced with a binary choice. It can self-destruct, a process known as apoptosis, leading to widespread, systemic tissue necrosis and the rapid degradation of the central nervous system. Or, far worse, the cell can attempt to forcefully stitch the fragmented DNA back together, resulting in a horrific, permanent genetic mutation that rapidly spirals into aggressive, untreatable forms of systemic cancer. Every single day spent on the Martian surface is a day spent standing naked in front of a microscopic, relentless firing squad. The purveyors of the Martian dream are, of course, entirely aware of this radiological nightmare. Their proposed solution is presented as a simple matter of civil engineering. If the sky is raining atomic shrapnel, they argue, we simply will not live on the surface. We will deploy autonomous excavators to dig massive, subterranean trenches. We will place our inflatable habitats into the deep scars of the Earth, and we will bury them beneath meters of Martian regolith. We will use the toxic planet itself as our armor. This is where the cold, unforgiving mechanics of high-energy particle physics reveal an utterly terrifying paradox. When you attempt to shield yourself from galactic cosmic rays using a localized layer of mass, you inadvertently create a completely different, secondary mechanism of cellular death. You see, when a high-energy iron ion, traveling at relativistic speeds, finally collides with the heavy, tightly packed nuclei of the Martian dirt sitting directly above your habitat. The cosmic ray does not simply stop, it shatters. The impact violently breaks apart both the incoming cosmic ray and the target nucleus in the dirt, unleashing a chaotic, secondary shower of high-energy subatomic particles, primarily consisting of fast neutrons. This phenomenon is known as spallation. By burying the habitat beneath a moderate layer of regolith, the engineers are essentially creating a subatomic fragmentation grenade directly over the heads of the colonists. Neutrons are incredibly dangerous biological disruptors, specifically because they carry no electrical charge, unlike protons or electrons, which interact magnetically with the atoms they pass through and quickly lose their energy. A fast neutron acts like a ghost. It effortlessly passes through the metal shielding of the habitat walls. It passes entirely through the human epidermis. A fast neutron only transfers its kinetic energy when it physically collides head-on with a nucleus of similar mass, and the single most common element in the human body, making up the vast majority of our water-based tissue, is hydrogen. When a secondary neutron from the dirt shield above strikes a hydrogen nucleus inside a colonist's brain, their liver, or the marrow of their bones, it violently knocks the hydrogen proton out of place, initiating a devastating cascade of localized internal radiation damage. To actually protect a human crew from both the primary galactic cosmic rays and the resulting secondary shower of lethal spallation neutrons, the habitat cannot merely be covered with a few feet of sand. It must be buried deep underground, trapped beneath several meters of solid, packed rock. You are not colonizing a new world. You are engineering a high-technology tomb. To survive the atmospheric vacuum, you must live inside a pressurized metal can. To survive the toxic perchlorate-laced dust, you must undergo exhaustive, aggressive decontamination every time you touch a door handle. To survive the invisible, endless storm of cosmic radiation, you must retreat deep into the pitch-black crust of a dead planet, hiding like a frightened animal from the sky above. You will never feel the wind on your face. You will never see the unfiltered light of the sun without looking through layers of thick, lead-doped glass. Your entire existence will be dictated by the relentless, humming drone of air scrubbers and radiation monitors. But even if we successfully conquer the chemistry of the dust, and even if we willingly accept a permanent, subterranean existence to hide from the cosmic firing squad, the universe has engineered a final, inescapable structural barrier. There is one fundamental, mechanical law of planetary physics that no amount of engineering, no depth of shielding, and no technological breakthrough can ever circumvent. It is a slow, silent force that will methodically dismantle the human framework from the inside out, and it is a barrier that makes the permanent settlement of the red planet an absolute biological impossibility. We navigate our entire lives completely blind to the most dominant architect of our physical existence. We treat gravity merely as the invisible tether that keeps our feet planted firmly on the dirt, a simple background constant of the universe. But gravity is not merely a force of attraction. It is the fundamental, inescapable scaffolding upon which the entire human biological machine was meticulously constructed. Every single strand of muscle fiber, every millimeter of your skeletal structure, and every microscopic branching capillary in your vascular system was engineered over 3.8 billion years within a brutally specific, high-tension planetary crucible. We were forged to exist under an unrelenting downward acceleration of precisely 9.8 meters per second squared. We are not just built to survive in that specific gravitational field. We are literally built out of it. When we project our ambitions toward the red planet, we willfully ignore the terrifying mathematics of planetary scale. Mars is an incredibly small world. It possesses roughly half the diameter of Earth, and far more consequentially, it contains only 10% of our planet's total mass, because the curvature of space-time, the invisible phenomenon we experience as gravity, is dictated entirely by the raw amount of matter compressed into a sphere. The gravitational pull on the Martian surface is drastically, fatally weak. It operates at precisely 3.7 to 1 meters per second squared. This translates to roughly 38% of the gravitational resistance you are experiencing at this exact moment. To the romantic, heavily propagandized mind of the modern public, this mathematical reduction sounds like a thrilling, liberating side effect of interplanetary exploration. We watch slick animations of colonists bounding effortlessly across the red dunes, lifting impossibly heavy equipment with a single hand, and leaping over impact craters like highly trained athletes. We perceive a massive reduction in gravity as an almost magical superpower. But to the cold, unforgiving mechanics of human biology, a 62% sudden drop in the gravitational constant is not a superpower. It is a catastrophic, systemic deconstruction order. It is the immediate initiation of a slow, agonizing unraveling of the human form. To understand the sheer horror of this biological decay, we must first look deep into the microscopic architecture of the human skeleton. We possess a dangerous misconception that our bones are rigid, dead scaffolds of calcium, a permanent, unchanging frame constructed once during our youth. In absolute reality, your skeleton is a highly active, incredibly dynamic organ system engaged in a perpetual, microscopic war of structural destruction and recreation. Right now, at this very second, deep within the marrow of your bones, millions of specialized, highly aggressive cells, known as osteoclasts, are systematically hunting down and dissolving microscopic stress fractures and aging bone tissue. Trailing closely behind these destroyers are their biological counterparts, construction cells, known as osteoblasts. These builders meticulously lay down fresh, resilient bone matrix, replacing exactly what was dissolved. This endless, perfect cycle of skeletal demolition and reconstruction is governed by a fundamental biomechanical law of the universe. It dictates that bone tissue will adapt precisely and only to the mechanical loads placed upon it. When you walk, when you run, or when you simply force yourself to stand up against the crushing, invisible weight of Earth's heavy gravity, you are sending a continuous stream of microscopic piezoelectric signals deep through your skeletal matrix. These localized electrical signals tell the osteoblasts exactly where the structural stress is highest. You are, quite literally, commanding your skeleton to remain dense and unyielding. When you violently strip away 62% of that heavy mechanical load, those crucial command signals instantly fade into absolute silence. The human body is, above all things, a ruthlessly efficient, energy-conserving machine. It will absolutely not expend precious metabolic energy to maintain a massive, heavy, armor-plated skeleton that it no longer needs to fight planetary gravity. The very day a colonist steps out of their landing craft and sets their boots onto the Martian dirt, the delicate, perfectly tuned balance of the skeletal war is completely shattered. The osteoblasts, the builders, dramatically halt their production, sensing no physical resistance to justify their labor. But the destroyers continue their relentless, acid-based dissolution of the bone tissue at an entirely unchanged, voracious pace. The human skeleton immediately begins to consume itself from the inside out, even with incredibly strict, agonizing daily regimens of intense resistance exercise. Humans living in deeply reduced gravity permanently lose roughly 1 to 2% of their total bone mass every single month. On a multi-year, permanent expedition to the Red Planet, this terrifying mathematical decay compounds into an absolute structural nightmare. The architecture of the human femur, the dense load-bearing rings of the pelvis, and the critical vertebrae of the lower spine are entirely hollowed out. The intricate, microscopic arches of calcium that give our bones their phenomenal strength dissolve away, leaving behind a structure that mathematically resembles a fragile, desiccated sea sponge. A minor, trivial stumble while walking across the claustrophobic floor of the subterranean habitat. A sudden, jerky movement while wearing a heavy, pressurized environmental suit will result in catastrophic, multi-level spiral fractures. And because the fundamental mechanism for building new bone has been permanently deactivated by the environment, these devastating fractures will simply refuse to heal. But while the structural foundation of the human machine crumbles into chalk, a second, equally terrifying mechanical failure begins deep within the human chest. We romanticize the human heart as the seat of emotion, but in cold, physical reality, it is an industrial-grade, muscular fluid pump. It was meticulously over-engineered by billions of years of evolution to perform one specific, agonizing task: to violently push massive volumes of heavy fluid constantly upward, fighting a fierce, vertical battle against the downward pull of Earth's gravity, driving blood from the tips of your toes all the way up into the delicate capillary networks of your brain. When you plummet into a world with only 38% of that gravitational resistance, the heavy, invisible hand holding the blood in your lower extremities is instantly removed. The massive volume of blood and interstitial fluid that is normally anchored in your legs aggressively and violently migrates upward. It floods the human chest, and it gorges the vascular system of the head. This massive, unnatural, internal flood triggers an immediate cascade of catastrophic false alarms within the human central nervous system. Highly sensitive pressure monitors located in the major arteries of the neck, known as baroreceptors, detect the massive swelling in the upper torso. The brain incorrectly and fatally assumes that the body is suddenly drowning in a massive excess of total fluid volume. To save itself from this perceived drowning, the body immediately triggers an aggressive, systemic flush of hydration. The kidneys shift into overdrive. Within the first few weeks on the Martian surface, the colonists will rapidly and involuntarily excrete roughly 20% of their total blood plasma into the waste recyclers of their habitat. Because the liquid plasma is aggressively purged from the system, the ratio of red blood cells to liquid violently spikes. The blood flowing through the veins of the colonists becomes incredibly thick, sluggish, and highly viscous, dramatically elevating the immediate threat of fatal deep vein thrombosis and massive pulmonary embolisms. But the true victim of this cardiovascular nightmare is the great muscular pump itself. Because it no longer has to violently fight against a heavy planetary gravity to push blood upward, the heart muscle is suddenly subjected to a profound lack of physical resistance, and just like the hollowed-out skeleton, the cardiovascular tissue undergoes rapid, profound, and irreversible atrophy. The heart muscle loses massive amounts of its critical mass. It loses its vital electrical efficiency. It fundamentally loses its structural shape, slowly morphing from an elongated, incredibly powerful, twisting teardrop into a small, weakened, highly inefficient spherical sac. If a colonist, after enduring years of this severe cardiac degradation, were to ever experience a sudden, high-gravity event, perhaps a failure in a pressurized transport vehicle, or a rapid deceleration, their weakened, spherical heart would completely instantaneously fail to push the thickened blood up to their brain, resulting in massive, immediate, and fatal cardiac arrest. Yet, the dissolution of the skeleton and the hollowing out of the heart are merely the mechanical failures of the limbs and the chest. There is a third consequence of this altered gravitational state, a deeply insidious, localized structural horror that human engineers are entirely powerless to stop. It is a slow, creeping darkness that strikes directly at the very sensory mechanism we rely upon to perceive the universe. Deep within the dark, sealed cavern of the human skull, your brain does not simply rest upon the jagged bone of the cranial floor. It is delicately suspended, floating perfectly and weightlessly in a highly pressurized bath of clear, nutrient-rich liquid known as cerebrospinal fluid. On Earth, the heavy constant of our gravity constantly pulls this thick fluid downward into the spinal column, perfectly regulating the immense hydrostatic pressure inside your head. On the surface of Mars, in a state of deeply reduced planetary mass, that critical pressure regulation completely, fatally fails. The thick fluid aggressively rushes upward and stubbornly, relentlessly pools inside the cranial vault. The pressure inside the skull slowly begins to build, mounting day after day, month after month. The soft, delicate tissue of the brain is gently but forcefully squeezed against the rigid, unyielding bone of the skull. Because the human skull is a fused, inflexible, biologically sealed box, the mounting, terrible pressure has only one physical avenue of escape. It pushes violently forward, directly into the backs of the human eyes. The optic nerve, the critical, thick biological cable that connects the back of the eyeball directly to the visual processing centers of the brain, begins to gorge and swell with trapped fluid as the internal cranial pressure continues its relentless climb. The physical, structural shape of the human eyeball is violently distorted. The clear, perfectly pressurized spherical globe is literally crushed from behind. The immense pressure physically flattens the posterior pole of the eye. This terrifying phenomenon is a documented, clinical reality known to space medicine as spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. The violent physical flattening of the eyeball fundamentally alters the intricate focal point of light entering the retina. The colonists will begin to experience a severe, entirely irreversible degradation of their visual acuity. Their reality will slowly become blurry. The pristine high-definition displays of their life support monitors, the intricate dials of their airlocks, and the faces of their fellow crew members will slowly melt into unreadable, glowing smudges. As the merciless years grind on in the darkness of their subterranean habitats, the continuous crushing internal pressure on the optic nerve causes the delicate nerve fibers to physically buckle, fray, and permanently die. The internal layers of the eye develop deep, microscopic wrinkles known as choroid folds. It is not a temporary inconvenience that can be solved with a new prescription of corrective lenses. It is a permanent, progressive, mechanical blinding of the crew. We are attempting to send human beings millions of miles across the hostile void to gaze upon the majestic, alien surface of a new world, only to have the unforgiving, mathematical physics of that very world literally crush their biological ability to see it. This is the ultimate, terrifying paradox of the entire Martian endeavor. It is the immovable wall against which all of our technological arrogance shatters. We are a species entirely defined by our ability to engineer solutions to environmental problems. If the atmosphere is toxic, we simply engineer a chemical scrubber. If the ambient temperature plummets to a freezing death, we engineer a thermal heater. If the cosmic radiation is lethal, we engineer a massive wall of lead and rock. But you cannot, under any circumstances, engineer planetary mass. Gravity is not a machine you can turn on. It is the fundamental, immutable curvature of space-time, dictated entirely and exclusively by the sheer, staggering amount of heavy matter compressed into a planetary sphere. To give the red planet the life-sustaining gravity of Earth, you would literally have to drag multiple other planets out of their orbits and violently crash them into the Martian surface, fundamentally melting and rebuilding the entire world from a glowing sphere of molten slag over a timeline of tens of millions of years. The technology billionaires and the hopelessly optimistic spacecraft architects attempt to quietly sidestep this immutable physical barrier with theoretical, highly complex stopgaps. They propose building massive, rotating architectural structures on the Martian surface, colossal, spinning centrifuges designed to trap the colonists inside and hurl them in endless, agonizing circles, attempting to simulate gravitational resistance using sheer centrifugal force, but attempting to implement such localized, brutal mechanical solutions while sitting on the surface of a planet that already possesses a partial gravity field creates an inescapable anatomical nightmare. Deep inside the human ear lies the vestibular system, an incredibly delicate, microscopic labyrinth of fluid-filled sensory canals that dictates our absolute sense of balance, orientation, and spatial reality. If a colonist attempts to live inside a rapidly spinning centrifuge while simultaneously being pulled downward by the weak, perpendicular gravity of Mars, the deeply conflicting physical data will completely tear their sensory processing apart. Every single time a colonist turns their head to speak to a colleague or reaches down to pick up a tool, the severe sensory conflict creates a terrifying neurological event known as the Coriolis illusion. The brain completely loses its grip on reality. The conflict triggers violent, continuously debilitating waves of nausea, extreme vertigo, and absolute spatial disorientation. You cannot physically survive your entire existence trapped inside a spinning high-speed carnival ride while attempting to operate delicate, hypercritical, life-support machinery. The human mind will simply break. The brutal, inescapable reality is that there is absolutely no software patch, no mechanical centrifuge, and no technological miracle that can rewrite the gravitational constant of the universe. The mass of the planet is a fixed, non-negotiable, eternal number, and that number, 3.7 to 1, is the ultimate mathematical mechanism that will systematically, flawlessly dismantle the human biological framework, leaving us trapped, blind, and slowly dissolving in the dark. When we synthesize these three catastrophic pillars, the toxic soil, the cosmic radiation, and the hollowing decay of reduced gravity, we are forced to confront a reality that the architects of our future are desperately trying to ignore. Mars is not merely a difficult, passive environment. It is a unified, highly efficient biological elimination system. The radiation methodically damages the intricate genetic code within our cells, but the deeply reduced gravity simultaneously weakens the human immune system's ability to clear out those necrotic, mutating cells. Meanwhile, the microscopic perchlorate-laced dust aggressively poisons the exact metabolic energy required to fuel any internal biological repair mechanisms. It is not a series of individual engineering challenges. It is a compounding, inescapable cascade of biological death. To avoid confronting this terrifying synergy, the most prominent figures in private spaceflight consistently utilize the terminology of modern computer science to justify their ambitions. They argue that humanity is a fragile operating system currently running on a single, highly vulnerable server. To guarantee the survival of the light of consciousness, they claim, we must establish a secondary, redundant data center on a neighboring world. The colonization of Mars is pitched to the public as the ultimate planetary backup drive. But you cannot back up a complex biological ecosystem as if it were a string of digital code. A server farm is fundamentally agnostic to its environment. As long as it has electricity and thermal cooling, it will process data whether it is buried in the frozen tundra of Iceland or sitting on the humid equator. Human biology, however, is not software. It is a highly localized, hyper-specialized physical manifestation of one single, specific planet. Let us engage in a dark, hypothetical exercise. Let us imagine that the billionaires succeed. Let us imagine that through sheer brute force engineering and the expenditure of trillions of dollars, a permanent, self-sustaining colony is somehow established deep within the Martian crust. A sprawling subterranean city buried securely beneath 20 feet of compacted, irradiated regolith, entirely sealed off from the silent, freezing vacuum above. What happens to the human species when it is locked inside a high-technology tomb for multiple generations? The first generation of colonists, the pioneers, would be the tragic transition generation. They would arrive with strong, earth-forged skeletons and robust cardiovascular systems. Over their remaining decades, they would slowly watch their bodies physically wither, their vision blur into unreadable smudges, and their peers succumb to aggressive, radiation-induced malignancies. But they would at least possess the memory of the wind on their face, the smell of rain, and the vast blue oceans of their home. The true existential horror begins with the second generation, the children of the dust. A human child conceived, gestated, and born in an environment possessing only 38% of Earth's planetary mass would not be a standard human being. In the womb, fetal development is heavily dictated by physical forces. The cardiovascular system of a developing fetus builds its necessary strength by fighting the ambient gravitational pull. Without that heavy resistance, a Martian-born child would develop a fundamentally weakened, highly inefficient spherical heart from the very moment of inception. Their skeletal structure, receiving virtually no piezoelectric signals, demanding high bone density, would grow incredibly elongated, spindly, and hyperfragile. Their bones would physically resemble the delicate, hollow structure of avian wings rather than the dense pillars of terrestrial mammals. If a Martian-born adolescent were to ever attempt the journey back to the world of their ancestors, the moment their spacecraft entered Earth's atmosphere and the crushing reality of 9.8 meters per second squared took hold, their fragile ribcage would instantly collapse under its own weight, and their weakened heart would fatally fail to pump heavy blood to their brain. They would be permanently, biologically exiled, prisoners of the dead world. This physical divergence is merely the beginning of a profound, accelerated speciation event. In biology, speciation occurs when a population is completely isolated and subjected to radically different environmental pressures. But this would not be the slow, majestic evolution driven by natural selection over millions of years. This would be a violent, traumatic, technological devolution. Because the colony must survive in a deeply confined, heavily regulated, artificial environment, the psychological toll would be unprecedented in the history of human existence. Human beings are psychologically wired to exist in open, dynamic ecosystems. We require the subtle, chaotic variations of nature, the shifting of seasons, the unpredictable movement of clouds, the organic presence of other living species. The Martian colonists would exist in a sterile, static, metallic corridor. Every breath of oxygen they take would be mathematically calculated and rationed by an algorithm. Every drop of water they consume would be aggressively, chemically filtered from the localized waste systems. The constant, low-frequency hum of the mechanical atmospheric scrubbers would be the permanent, inescapable soundtrack of their entire lives. When Apollo astronauts traveled to the moon, they experienced a profound cognitive shift known as the overview effect. Looking back at the brilliant, glowing blue marble suspended in the infinite black, they felt a deep, unifying sense of biological connection to our world. But the moon is practically in Earth's backyard. From the desolate surface of Mars, Earth is not a massive, comforting sphere. It is merely a pale, indistinct blue dot, barely brighter than the surrounding stars. It is easily lost in the blinding glare of the sun. For a human mind to look up into the black sky and realize that every single human being who has ever lived, every piece of art ever created, every river, ocean, and forest, is confined to that singular, unreachable speck of light, triggers a documented, terrifying psychological phenomenon known as the Earth out of view paradigm. It is an absolute, crushing severance of the psychological umbilical cord. The human brain simply cannot process that level of absolute, cosmic isolation without fundamentally fracturing. To maintain order in an environment where a single shattered window or a single malfunctioning pressure valve means the instantaneous death of the entire population, the social structure of the colony would necessarily evolve into a hyper-authoritarian, rigidly controlled surveillance state. Democracy is a luxury of a forgiving environment. When oxygen is a manufactured commodity and water is a finite resource managed by a central computer, personal freedom becomes a lethal liability. The society that emerges in the dark would not be a utopian extension of the human spirit. It would be a terrified, fragile, deeply traumatized collective, clinging to survival in the face of a universe that fundamentally wants them dead. And yet, even this grim, subterranean existence operates on a deeply flawed, incredibly arrogant assumption. It assumes that complex, artificial machinery can perfectly mimic the monumental, self-sustaining mechanics of an entire planetary biosphere for centuries on end. This brings us to the supreme, inescapable law of thermodynamics, the law of entropy. Entropy dictates that all closed systems inevitably, unavoidably degrade from a state of order into a state of chaos. On Earth, the degradation of our technological systems is masked by the massive, endless influx of energy from the sun interacting with an active, living ecosystem. If a machine breaks, we simply extract more resources from the living planet to build a new one. A Martian colony is an entirely closed, deeply fragile thermodynamic loop. Every single piece of machinery, the thermal regulators, the heavy electrolysis machines that mathematically strip oxygen from the frozen water, the heavy lead blast doors, has a mathematical breaking point. The microscopic, jagged glass of the perchlorate dust does not just ravage human lung tissue, it aggressively, relentlessly infiltrates the microscopic tolerances of mechanical engineering. It works its way into the sealed bearings of the airlock hinges, grinding the tempered metal into fine powder. It coats the intricate, gold-plated circuitry of the communication arrays, causing unpredictable, catastrophic electrical arcing. The sheer mechanical friction of the alien environment ensures that every piece of technology is actively deteriorating from the exact second it is deployed. You cannot establish a massive industrial supply chain on a dead world. You cannot mine, smelt, refine, and manufacture complex microprocessors and medical-grade silicon seals in an environment where stepping outside requires a pressurized suit. The colony would be entirely, helplessly dependent on a continuous, unbroken umbilical cord of heavy supply ships launching from Earth, crossing tens of millions of miles of empty space. Planetary orbital mechanics dictate that Earth and Mars only align for a highly efficient launch window once every 26 months. The journey itself takes between 7 to 9 months. If a critical failure occurs in the primary life support matrix, if an underground structural aquifer collapses, or a severe solar flare permanently fries the central atmospheric algorithms, there is absolutely no possibility of a rapid rescue. A desperate distress signal, traveling at the absolute speed of light, would take anywhere from 3 to 22 minutes just to reach the deep space receivers on Earth. The cries for help would be heard by a paralyzed audience, sitting millions of miles away, completely powerless to intervene. The colonists would be forced to watch their oxygen levels mathematically decline over weeks, fully aware of the exact hour, the exact minute, that they will suffocate in the dark. When we peel back the layers of romanticized animation and billion-dollar marketing campaigns, the hidden consequence of the Martian endeavor is a profound, terrifying revelation about the actual nature of our reality. For the past century, as our orbital telescopes grew larger and our physics grew more advanced, we have stared into the endless, silent expanse of the Milky Way galaxy, waiting to hear the radio chatter of a massive galactic civilization. We have formulated the Fermi paradox, the deeply unsettling contradiction between the high mathematical probability of extraterrestrial life and the deafening, absolute silence we actually observe. We have long hypothesized that there must be a great filter, a universal, highly lethal barrier that prevents biological species from expanding beyond their home star. We assumed this filter would be a dramatic, self-inflicted apocalypse, like a runaway nuclear holocaust or an artificial intelligence violently turning against its creators. But the terrifying reality we are uncovering on the surface of our closest neighbor suggests a far more mundane and far more absolute mechanism of universal extinction. The Great Filter is not a bomb. The Great Filter is simply the unyielding, mathematically perfect hostility of interplanetary physics. It is the slow, mechanical dissolving of the skeleton in low planetary mass. It is the invisible, microscopic shredding of genetic code by relativistic heavy ions. It is the agonizing chemical strangulation by highly oxidized, toxic dust. We are slowly, painfully, realizing that the universe was not designed as an endless, romantic frontier for biological conquerors. The vacuum of space is an absolute, uncompromising quarantine zone, and a planet with a churning liquid iron core, a massive gravitational anchor, and a deep, pressurized ocean of breathable gas is not simply a starting point. It is an incredibly rare, hyper-specific biological sanctuary, a microscopic, glowing oasis of warmth suspended in a freezing, infinite desert of radiation and dead rock. By fixating our genius, our massive capital, and our hopes on the impossible colonization of a corpse, we are actively ignoring the singular, terrifying miracle of our own existence. We are looking directly past the only machinery in the known universe capable of sustaining the fragile architecture of the human form. We navigate our century suffering from a profound, collective delusion of grandeur. We look up at the terrifying, silent expanse of the night sky, and we convince ourselves that human consciousness is a fire so uniquely magnificent that the universe will inevitably carve out a space for it to spread. We view the desolate, irradiated spheres of our solar system not as what they actually are, but as blank, waiting canvases, eagerly anticipating the arrival of our engineering genius. We deeply believe that because we have learned to split the atom and manipulate digital code, we have somehow earned the divine right to outsmart the thermodynamic laws of nature. But the cosmos does not recognize our ambition, and it certainly does not respect our technology. It does not care about our billionaire profits, our beautifully rendered architectural animations, or our desperate psychological need for an interplanetary backup drive. The universe operates on a scale of time, mass, and violence that renders human existence entirely microscopic. It is a perfect, flawless machine of absolute thermodynamic equilibrium, and it possesses no empathy for the biological anomalies that briefly spark into existence upon a tiny rock. To colonize the red planet is not to take the next glorious, triumphant step in human evolution. It is to wage a conscious, intentional, and entirely unwinnable war against our own biological framework. It is the active, arrogant decision to subject the human skeleton to absolute structural decay, the human brain to crushing hydrostatic pressure, and the human genome to the invisible, unrelenting shredding of relativistic cosmic fire. We are so utterly consumed by the romanticized terror of a hypothetical apocalypse on our home world that we are willing to expend trillions of dollars to physically engineer a suffocating, subterranean graveyard millions of miles away in the absolute dark. We are meticulously designing high-technology tombs, outfitting them with air scrubbers and pressurized seals, and selling them to the public under the grand, tragic guise of exploring a new frontier. We are treating the violent, unforgiving mechanics of planetary physics as if they were nothing more than a minor inconvenience of logistics. The sheer, uncompromising hostility of the Martian surface is not a mechanical puzzle waiting to be solved by a clever algorithm. It is a cold, indifferent mirror reflecting our own terrifying fragility back at us. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable, agonizing truth that we are not the destined masters of the cosmic ocean. We are a hyper-specialized, deeply vulnerable biological anomaly, permanently and fatally tethered to the exact gravitational mass, the exact magnetic field, and the exact atmospheric pressure of the single, lonely sphere that birthed us. There is no second home waiting for us in the dark. There is no escaping the thermodynamic trap of our own biology. If humanity eventually insists on crossing that freezing, irradiated void, If we insist on stepping out of the armored, magnetic cradle of our world and planting a synthetic flag in the toxic, perchlorate-laced dust, we will not be planting the seed of a grand, new, interstellar civilization. We will not become a multiplanetary species, proudly looking back at the pale blue dot of our origins. We will simply be delivering our own fragile, terrestrial anatomy directly to a cosmic executioner. We will suffocate in the very dirt we sought to conquer, our bones hollowed out by the weak gravity, and our cellular structures erased by the relentless radiation of deep space. The silence of the universe is not an invitation, it is a warning, and the stars are not calling to us. They are simply burning, indifferent, cold, and forever out of reach.